Started, here are a few tips on using the Zoom platform so you can engage with our presenters and have the best experience possible. You should see a Zoom toolbar with icons for Ask a Question and Raise Your Hand. Please use the Ask a Question feature to submit a question or comment. If you need any assistance, click on the Raise Your Hand button and I will connect with you to help. We encourage you to ask questions throughout the presentation and we will do our best to answer them all. If we didn't answer your question, we will follow up with you personally after the presentation. Within 72 hours of the webinar, you will receive a link to download the slide deck and recorded presentation. And with that, I'd like to introduce you to our presenters, Todd Bowlesby and Dom Pernay.
Hello, everyone. This is Todd Bowlesby. I'm a senior manager here at Armanino in our technology consulting practice. Dom?
Thanks, Todd. Hi, everybody. I am Dom Pernay. I am the product director for Sage Intacct Real Estate. I've been in the industry for quite some time. You can tell by that picture, there's a little bit of gray hair there. I started my career in an accounting role in a variety of real estate organizations, and then progressed into a technology role a number of years ago. So thank you for your time and your attendance today. Our goal today is to make sure that we achieve a few learning objectives. Number one, we want to make sure that we talk to you about the various real estate market as the way we see it here at Sage, and all of the different types of assets and so on that people need to manage. We'd also want to make sure that you understand the solution that we're offering. So we will go into some great detail on this solution. You'll see a detailed presentation of the product itself today and some gory detail. And we love detailed questions. So please feel free to use that box to ask those questions. We're also going to want to make sure that we cover how you can set priorities for tracking your property and asset information, whether it's things around reminders for insurance or property tax information, things like that. And then also go down into the details of individual leases. We find that we need to make sure that we really administer the contract when it comes down to the leases. So we like to make sure that we go into detail so that you know how you can track in gory detail everything from renewal options, CAM reconciliations, all your step-ups in rent, all of those types of things that need to happen that you want to be aware of. And then lastly, we want to make sure that you see how customizable the format is, whether it be from within the lease structure or property structure itself, reporting, so on and so forth. So first, we want to talk about the industry as we view it here at Sage. For those of you who aren't aware, real estate is one of the largest industries in all of North America. And what you'll notice is we break down all the different segments here. And for some, it can be a bit eye-opening to see that there are over 10,000 firms in North America that manage different types of assets. So we've broken them down by square footage to make sure that you could see that market perspective that way. And what you'll notice is that multifamily has quite a bit of square footage, and that translates into roughly 23 million units. And when we talk about multifamily, we're also talking about single family home rental as part of that as well, which is a burgeoning area within real estate. We're seeing more and more of that throughout North America. Obviously, we also have a big cut of industrial space that continues to grow. Post-COVID, we just continue to see more and more industrial centers being built. And obviously, we still have plenty of office and retail space out there as well. Healthcare continues to grow at a big clip as well. So that's how we see the industry. And that leads us to our first polling question.
Okay, first polling question of the day. What types of assets do you own or manage? Retail, apartments SFHR, office MOB, or industrial/flex?
So we're just waiting for people to get the chance to respond to that.
All right, there we go, Dom. Most people in industrial flex, but also got some apartments SFHR and retail in there.
Excellent. All right. Thanks, Todd. I appreciate that. Now, when we break down those markets into more detail, when we think about those commercial spaces, there's a variety and complexity to the leases that we need to make sure that we track. And we want to make sure that we're handling all the different issues and items within those leases as we go along. So as an example, when it comes to retail rent, you may have percentage rent clauses where tenants are paying a portion of their rent based upon the sales that they have on a monthly basis. So therefore, inside Sage Intacct Real Estate, we'll make sure that we set up all of the different parameters around percentage rent to make sure that we can handle those types of issues, along with all of your rent steps for whether that be retail or office or even industrial, and all your CAM reconciliations, property tax, so on. When it comes to medical office buildings, we want to make sure that we can track any ownership issues that you might have as well. So we make sure that we track that in detail. When we talk about the residential space, we want to make sure we can do things that are all around conventional, whether that be all the leasing renewals that need to happen. So you'll find that we have a very flexible lease renewal option in Sage Intacct Real Estate, where you can set up by unit type different scenarios for those renewals. So you might say, if you renew for 1 year, your rent will go up 3.5%. If you go to 2 years, it might be a little bit less, 6 months. And then the system can generate all of that detailed offer in an email to all of your residents to make sure that they get all of those potential options and choose the one that's right for them. So that's the market in detail, which leads us to our next polling question.
All right, polling question number 2. Do you process CAM recoveries in Excel? Yes or no?
And certainly for those that do residential, this is not a question that would apply.
All right. Looks like the majority say no, Dom. One person
Okay,
looks
that's
like
a
said they
good,
said
that's
yes.
good. That means that you're leveraging your systems quite well, and you can make sure that those systems are calculating those CAM recoveries for you in detail. All right. Next, we want to make sure that we identify the different types of audiences that we see use Sage Intacct Real Estate. And kind of the 3 main categories are the owner operator, those people that own their assets and manage them for themselves. The first company I went to work at, we managed about 350 different assets nationwide with a variety of asset classes, from market rate conventional apartments all the way through central business district office towers and kind of everything in between. So Sage Intacct Real Estate does an excellent job of making sure that you can not only manage all the caveats and leases that you need, but does all of the detailed financial reporting around that, whether it be at a portfolio level, an asset type level, or whatever the case may be. We also work very well with developers. And those are people that may have a short-term or long-term strategy where they're going in and doing rehab and then reselling the product, or they're going in and maybe doing ground up construction, look to hold it for a number of years, and then market the asset based upon net operating income. So also, Sage Intacct does an excellent job of reflecting all the different financials that come into play when you're in an investment in scenario. Once you have gone into active development and you're tracking everything from hard costs, soft costs, FF&E, and so on, and then all the way through to the operations of it as well. And then lastly, we work quite well for fee managers. So another stop in my career was to work at a large fee manager, which managed about 250 different assets in kind of mainly the Midwest and the Southeast regions of the country. And within those, we're making sure that we're handling all of the information and calculating all of the appropriate management fees, whether it be based upon receipts or payroll reimbursements or whatever the case may be. So we'll make sure that we handle all of that. And now we'll get in and talk about the product in some detail. So Sage Intacct Real Estate is a comprehensive system built in a very easy to use format. And we always focus on how the database gets established, because it's within the magic to me within the system is the way we've architected the database to make sure it's easy to get to the data that you want from a reporting perspective. So you start out by setting up properties, units, and you might call them tenants or residents. I'll show you how you can easily change your terminology in the system. Then we get into the managing of the leases and all of those task-driven items that you go through, whether it's security deposit refunds that need to happen or billing of late fees, management fees, recoveries, so on. And then all of the detailed reporting that's a part of the system as well. And what you find within Sage Intacct Real Estate is it's a very lease-based system. There are a number of systems out there where you build a property, you section it into rentable space, units, apartments, office space, whatever, and then you move tenants in and out of those units. And it kind of creates a one-to-one scenario from tenant to unit. Within Sage Intacct Real Estate, we handle it a little bit differently because we think the lease is the most important item to make sure that we administer that lease agreement correctly. We create the property, section it into units, have a separate database of tenants, and we then put the lease squarely in the middle of it. And that allows us to have a scenario with one tenant, multiple units, much like the screenshot you see here on the right, where we have two suites or two spaces attached to one tenant, or multiple tenants if we have something like a sublease scenario or something like that with one unit. And now we can track that information, and we can also have multiple tenants, multiple units, and draw it all together. What that allows us to do is to make sure we get the rent roll correct at a detailed space level, because at that space level, we can track everything from our rent bumps to our different CAM and so on. You know, we may have a scenario where someone expands their premises, but they have a different CAM reconciliation. They have a different base year or a different stop or cap or whatever the case may be. This type of architecture, by putting the lease squarely in the middle, allows you to capture all of those details at a detailed space level to make sure that your rent roll is shown correctly. All right, with that, let's get into the product in some detail. So I always like to begin with this dashboard. This dashboard to me does a great job of illustrating how easy it is to pull all types of information together. So this will show us everything from entity information, property information within those entities, how many units are there, what's the square footage like. So all the detailed property tenant information and general ledger information. So when we begin by looking at dashboards in Sage Intacct, what we notice first is some of our filter bars up here at the top. So we first tell it the period of time we'd like to see. And then in this case, what locations or properties would we like to see? And these are completely user-defined groups. So if I wanted to look at all of the locations for a given property manager, I can set up a group for that property manager. Or I want to look at all of my commercial properties, or based upon a particular entity, or whatever the case may be. It's very easy for me to draw the dashboard that way. Once I've drawn the dashboard, now I look at all the different components that make it up. And as an example here, what I see are all of the properties within this group. Who are the parent entities of those properties? What type of property are they? How many square feet do they have? When did we acquire the property? What's our current AR balance based upon the date that we've entered here? What's our net operating income look like? And what is that per square foot also? And then we've also layered in some additional information around property tax amounts and land values and things like that. And you may notice that I get my little magnifying glass that pops up here because, of course, each of these then allow me to go through and drill in to see more detail. So I can click in here to see how the parent entity is established, who's the property manager as an example, and all the property information that I have on this dashboard. Now, this is a subset of the property data, and you'll see that as we go through here. But at this point, all we're really looking to do is just identify what information is there for this particular dashboard. This is not an all-encompassing list of all the data related to a property. And then I've got a list of the entities that I work with. So Sage Intacct makes it very easy to work within what we call the top level. So I can see all of my entities at once, or I can drill in into an individual entity. So if I'm an accountant or my role or responsibility is for only a certain group of entities, or that could be properties as well, I can easily drop that list right here on my screen. Next, I've got a couple different waterfall graphs. And in a commercial environment, we always like to highlight what expenses can we build back versus what expenses do we have to bear. So what we're doing is we're highlighting here our reimbursable expenses versus our non-reimbursable expenses. So as we look at this, we see these different categories here listed: property maintenance, repairs, so on and so forth. Those are 100% user definable. As you build your chart of accounts, you decide how you want to build those account groups and how they'll display on various reports. But of course, all of these have drill downs available as well. So if I decide I want to know what's in the property repairs, I can open that up, and now I see a full breakdown of all my categories. So I see my property repairs is $11,595, maybe what's in my roof repairs, and the system drills in and shows me each one of the bills that came in for that property and what they were. I can even go to the next step and see all the details about the bill, including a copy or image of the bill itself, if we'd like. So it's easy to get to all of this information this way. Another dashboard that we find that most people find important is really around financial reporting. But you're going to notice I've got more options up here at the top. So now not only am I picking the period of time I'd like to see, maybe we'll back this up a month. I can also then pick what property or properties or group of properties I'd like to see. I can even take it down to an individual tenant level. So what this is really highlighting is what is called dimensions. And maybe the most important point that we can make around Sage Intacct is how flexible dimension reporting is. So dimensions, I heard someone say this once, and I think it's an excellent quote, tell the story of every transaction that's happened. So when we look at an individual transaction, by looking at the dimensions, we know everything about it. And when it comes to our real estate application, we make sure that we attach everything with a minimum of the following 4 dimensions: the entity of the transaction, the property or location, the tenant or resident, and the individual lease. So what that allows me to do is to actually do detailed financial reporting and budgeting at an individual lease level. So if I want to do variance analysis on individual leases or assumptions that were made during budget season, it's very easy for me to do that because we're attaching all of those dimensions to every transaction and to every budget line item as well. Now, those are not the only dimensions that are available, but those are the ones that you would use at a minimum within Sage Intacct Real Estate. You might also attach a development or a project or job if you're doing tenant improvement work. So that way you can even track down to the lease level all of your expenses on tenant improvement work as well. Now, once I've done this, now it shows me these 4 rectangles up here. These are what we call performance cards. These are also completely user definable. Think of it as those key performance indicators that you want to be aware of within your system. So as an example here, these are very, very simple and easy. What does accounts receivable look like at this point? Oh, by the way, I changed my date. Let's hit apply and update the dashboard with that date. So I can see what does accounts receivable look like for that month, which August of 22, and what was the change to the prior month? What's net operating income look like for this month? And how does that compare to a year ago? So I can really see what my trend is as I'm looking at NOI, my property expenses, and all revenue versus a year ago as well. And then we're going to have a variety of financial statements listed here. This is not an exhaustive list. This is just an example. And you can develop and create a myriad of financial reporting here within Sage Intacct. So we start with our property income statement, 12 trailing months. So it's going to break out and show all of our revenue versus all of our expenses and show the current month based upon the date that I entered and 11 prior to give me my 12-month trailing total. So I can see exactly how my NOI has trended over the prior year. And yes, all of these have drill downs. So when I drill in here on a revenue line item, I see each tenant that was billed, in this case, retail rent. And it shows the amount of that. Well, if I know that I bill this tenant more than retail rent, what I can simply do is click on the transaction, and now it opens up everything that was billed, in this case, August 1st of 2022. And it shows me up here at the top if it was paid, when it was paid, how it was paid. And yes, I can drill in and even see the detail around that as well if I'd like to. I can see how the payment was applied in detail along with it. So that way, for those tenants that maybe don't pay everything that they owe, it's easy for me to do an analysis to see on their ledger what items are still open. Now, as I scroll down here, I then can see all of the things that we billed this tenant for on August 1st of 2022. So I don't just see the rent, I see they were also billed property tax, insurance, CAM, and so on. So it's very easy to always get to that detail as we go along. So that's one example of a financial statement, our 12 trailing months. Next, we're going to show it per square feet. So it's the same information showing for the month per foot and annually per foot, what do we look like? Now, we could also add a projected year-end column here with per square foot totals as well. And yes, you can do all sorts of reforecasts and so on and so forth. They're literally limitless how many of those you can do. Then we're listing what tenants owe us money and so on, and the detail behind that. And now we see net operating income year over year, so I can see my trend and where are my differences. So I can see we've increased rental income by $1,300, and our expenses have only increased by $257. And then, of course, last but not least, versus a budget. So I can see actual versus budget for the month and for the year, and all of our variance information here also. So very easy to pull this information. And for those of you that need to publish this information and maybe email it or whatever the case may be, you can create automated email rules to have these go out. It's also just as easy to click a button and to see exactly that information in a PDF format. So very easy to get to all of the reporting and all of the information. How do we get the data in the system? Well, when we click on a list of all the modules, we see the different modules that show up, accounts receivable, so on and so forth. And one thing to just mention here briefly is terminology. So you do have the ability to go in and customize what you would like your terminology to be. So I started with residents today. Let's change it to tenant and tenants. And when I hit save, it will take a minute, it'll refresh the screen, and all of those fields will be updated across the board for me. Well, I did that from resident to tenant. We could do it the same, whether it was location or property or whatever the case may be. So you'll notice now when I go to accounts receivable, I don't see residents, I see tenants. I don't see resident aging, I see tenant aging, tenant list, and so on. But we want to see how we get all of the real estate data in. So we start by going to our real estate screen, we hit setup, and we start with our properties. Now, whenever we bring up a list of any information inside Sage Intacct, we can sort on any of the columns that we'd like to. We can do a partial search, do a contained search, and pull up the records that we're after. And yes, all of these can be pushed out to a variety of formats as well. So if we'll go into Columbia Place here as an example, and we see here's the name of the property, is it active or inactive? If we dispose of an asset, we can mark it inactive and it'll mark all of the affected records with it inactive as well. Still there for all of our reporting, but not there from a day in, day out processing perspective. And we see how many units we have, how many are occupied, how many are leased. So if we've written a lease for a given unit, but they haven't moved in yet, this is how we're able to see that overall information. There's also detailed reports on move-ins and move-outs as well. Next, we see what type of property is it, and you see this is a pull-down list. That's a completely customizable list that you can set in the preferences section of the real estate system. So you can put in the different types of properties you want to track, the different types of square footage, what types of insurance do you require people to have. You can build user-defined lists for all of those different items as we go along here. Next, we then see, do we want to track occupancy? And if we want to track occupancy, is it based upon when the space is occupied or leased? What date should we use as we're calculating those occupancy percentages? For our residential, this is a commercial property, but for our residential properties, do we want to track vacancy loss? If we do we want to base it upon market rent or what the last current rent was? How do we want to prorate it? And what GL accounts do we want to hit as part of creating that vacancy loss entry? We then go in and establish all the detailed square footage options, and we do these with as of dates. We know that common areas may change, so therefore we might have a different denominator for new leases that come along. But we need to keep the existing denominator there for all the leases we have in force. Next, we identify all the different types of rent or income that we might have associated with this property. So we can track all of that in detail. Is it part of base rent? Is it subject to a management fee? Or subject to late fees? We identify all of that. And then we go in and give it kind of our basics for calculating late fees at the property level. But remember, we're a lease-based system. So all of this can be customized on an individual lease basis. So I've said here as an example, it's a 5% fee. Notice it can be flat amount or percentage, greater of, lesser of, different grace days. We can have multiple fees. So if we bill a fee on the 4th of the month, and then we bill a daily fee, which is very common that we see with our residential clients, we can certainly track all of that all the way through. And we then can also calculate your management fees. And those management fees can be formula driven or flat fee, or a combination of by putting in a base amount. And when we do these, we not only set them up in the accounts payable system, we also set them up on your corporate books as items that are due from the property owner. So if you're a fee manager, you want to make sure that you can track your own corporate receivables, and this will do that for you automatically. So when it calculates the management fee, at the same time, it calculates the corporate receivable. So you then have a detailed report from that perspective to see all the receivable of management fees owed to you as well. We can then track all the property tax information, land value, building value, so on. And we also have the ability to add attachments in. So if we actually want to add in an image of the property and what that may look like, or a title report, or whatever the case may be, you'll see that throughout the system. And we also, I like to point out, we have a duplicate feature here that is throughout Sage Intacct. That's not just real estate, that's really everywhere. So if we want to duplicate properties, units, tenants, leases, general ledger entries, accounts payable bills, all of those types of things, those options are all there for you. So we build the property, we then go in and build in detail our units. And the units, once again, just all of those rentable spaces and what those dimensions are and how we'd like to track those. So in detail, what type of unit is this? If it's residential, what type of floor plan would it be? And that's all user defined as well. And then we can build all of our lease renewal options based upon those different floor plan options. So we can see all of our address information here, market rent versus current rent, square footage as well. And we do track square footage changes for common area reconciliations that we'd like to do. So we can track that in detail. So in this example, we know they'll have one pro rata share for the first 22 days of the year, and then a new pro rata share for the balance of the year. A spot to track all your utility meter information that you'd like to, and then of course attachments as well. So now we've built our property, we've sectioned it into our rentable spaces. Next, we want to have our database of tenants. We really established that in the accounts receivable system. And now you notice when I click here, I see a listing of all my tenants. Once again, all of these can be sorted based upon any of the columns that we have. If I click view, I'll see the information about that given tenant here. I want to make sure I say tenant, not resident, because I changed the name. I see their primary contact info here, but then when I go to their contact list, I see I can add as many contacts as I'd like here as well. We also have the ability to go through and add custom fields. So if we want to track things like licensing information or occupancy permits, these are things I've added very quickly on the fly. You have the ability to not only add custom fields, you can choose where you add them, on which tab and which section within that tab as well. So you have a lot of flexibility in there. Now, one of the other things to note is when I pull up my listing of tenants, once again, when I see the amounts that they owe and all of those types of things, if I click their name, the system will actually open up for me their tenant ledger right on the screen. And I can customize this, and we have an option called Inception to Date that I love. And now this will show their full ledger for as long as they've been in, all their charges, all their payments, drill downs on everything. So I can see all their payment detail and how it was even posted in the GL in detail if I'd like to. And of course, the same thing for all of their billings. I can click in and see all of their detailed billings as they've happened as well. So it's very simple and easy to get to that level of detail. All right, we've gone through, we've set up our property and our units, we've created our tenants, now we set up our detailed lease. So we go into our lease option. We get a listing of all the different leases within the system. Of course, I can do a portion of the name and find the people I'm after that way. Of course, I can sort on any of the columns as we've mentioned. When I click edit, now it opens up this lease for me. And in this scenario, what it's doing is it's showing I have one tenant with multiple spaces that they occupy. So I can track that information in detail because at the unit level, we've put in the different square footage and all of those information, number of bedrooms, bathrooms, things like that. It already has all of the attributes of those units stored there. And then what important dates do I want to track for this lease? When did the lease start? When does it expire? When did move-in take place? If I want to track other dates like certificate of occupancy for the build-outs that we do and lease execution, I can do that. Next, I go to the next tab of recurring charges. And in here, I see all the different charges that they have. I see the current amounts of those charges, but I can also drill in and see the detail of how that charge is arrived at. So here I can have all the rent bumps listed right here and the amount of that charge. And of course, we see in our system that most people use monthly, but monthly is certainly not the only option. And I always like to point out the one option here called one time, because this is for those scenarios where you might have free rent that happens and it doesn't happen on a consistent basis throughout the lease. So this way you can easily establish one-time charges at the point that you do your original lease abstract to make sure you don't lose track of it, and the system will make sure that it handles that charge or credit automatically at the proper time. We then also see if it's subject to percentage rent. So that then cues us to our percentage rent tab for any of those retail tenants that pay based upon percentage rent. We can track by different store types that we need to. Once again, customizable list. We can go in and tell it how often that billing happens and the last time it was done and the next time it's due to be done and what type of sales we need to track and so on. And then we get into the detailed calculation. What type of breakpoint are we using? A cumulative or non-cumulative breakpoint? Do we back out any of their monthly fixed charges? In this case, we do with rent, and then identify the breakpoint tables. And those obviously can have different effective dates and put in all of our steps related to that. Now, also in our recurring charge, we do identify what unit each of these are for. So when we generate our rent roll, it does it correctly. When I look at my CAM revenue, this is what they're currently being billed. And that, in this example, is an estimate that's being billed at this point. So they're being billed an estimate of $536.50. And how is that then going to be reconciled or calculated for the original monthly amount? Well, by going in and clicking on the recovery controls, this is where we see the detail of that CAM reconciliation. First, I always like to point out that you have the ability to set up templates. You can set up an unlimited number of templates if you'd like. So that way you only have to go in and do minimal updating on an individual lease by lease basis. And if they're using your standard lease, you may not need to do any updating at all. So in here, we identify how often we process the recovery. When we calculate their pro rata share, how far should we take that pro rata share out in terms of decimal places? Some leases we see these days go to 2, some to 3. This way, it's very easy for you to identify. And then what are my expense pools? So I can come in and set up my detailed expense pools. These are completely user definable. You can type in that expense category and call it whatever you'd like. You tell it if they're fixed or vary with occupancy, if they're subject to an admin fee, and then how do we come up with that pro rata share? And when we're looking at that pro rata share, do we want to use a square footage? And as I had mentioned earlier, these have the ability to be completely user definable. And the unit square footage over the property square footage, or do we want to use a manual percentage? And that's something that can just be keyed in if we'd like, or obviously use the system to use the square footage for the math. And then we link it to the GL accounts. So now we come in here and maybe look at utilities, and it shows all the different GL accounts that lead to that utility grouping. And I can find this by just going in and keying in an account number if I'd like to, or I have the ability to just come in and type in an account name and find it that way. So the system is very flexible from that perspective and allows you to do it either way. Now, if I get into a scenario where maybe this tenant has their own gas meter, so therefore they don't pay any gas, it's that simple to eliminate gas from their portion of the recovery if I'd like to. And you'll notice under the actual expense, this is where the system, you've told it to pull over what the expenses are for all of these different groupings and post them. So you do have the ability to make marketing decisions. If under property repairs, we did something like a big roof repair and we don't think we can bill it all back and we don't want to, you do have the ability to manually adjust that if you'd like, either for the property as a whole or on an individual lease basis, if you'd like. Also in here, as we go along, we see that we can add our admin fees on if we need to do that. And we can put in our base years and stops and caps and all of those types of things as well. And we do have the ability to put caps on individual groupings or line items of our expense categories. Since we've seen kind of the changes in inflation, we see a lot of leases these days that identify controllable versus non-controllable expenses. So you can make sure that you put your cap on those controllable expenses if that's a scenario that you have to deal with. So that's how you're able to track all of that information. Then, as I had mentioned, you can customize your late fee and how it's billed for this particular lease. You can track your security deposits in detail. You'll know exactly when they were billed and if they've been paid. If you do have letters of credit, you can track that information, when it expires, and so on. And now we get to our insurance tab. So once again, pull down lists, so you can customize it with any type of insurance you'd like. But not only do we track the COI, we also send out automatic reminders about those insurance. So whether it's renter's insurance in your residential property or in your commercial property for general liability or whatever the case may be that you require, the system on the date that you put in is the notification date will automatically send out an email to the emails that you list. And what most people do is they send it to the tenant and copy the property manager, so the property manager knows it went out, letting that tenant know that you need to get an updated COI from them before the expiration date of their current COI. Also along those lines, we track detailed lease clauses. So you can create a list of all the different types of lease clauses that you want to track and put that in as well. So then when you generate a lease abstract, all of this information shows up for you. And these have the ability for you to put in a short description and an unlimited note if you'd like to. I actually thought I had done one that was a little bit more. Nope, I must not have saved it. But you can put in as much detail as you'd like, and you can generate reminders here as well. So if you've got a renewal option that's going to expire and you want to make sure your property manager knows about it ahead of time, you can pop in that notification date, and on that date, the system will automatically send that notification out. And just like the other parts of the system, I can also add in attachments here as well. So we have the ability to go through and track our certificate of insurance and track that here, put the actual lease document in as well. And you have the ability to go through and kind of see that all the way through. So that's how we get all the data established. Then it's a matter of going in and doing our routine billing. So we might start by doing our generate scheduled charges. Now, this feature we've recently automated, so you have the ability to come in here and tell the system, on the 15th of every month, I want you to generate a preview of the charges, email it out to people for review. Once it's been approved, you can click a link on that email and post it automatically. But it's in here where we're able to go through and identify all of the detailed charges that need to happen. I can tell it the date I want it to post if I don't want it to use the first of the month. If I wanted to post it on the second or third of the month, I have the ability to do that. I tell it the property or properties I want to do this for, and then the system generates all of the charges in detail, lease by lease for me all the way through. And once we generate those charges, it updates the accounts receivable system so that then when I go in to AR and I go in and get a listing of all my invoices, I see all of those charges as they've taken place. And yes, once again, drill in and see the detail. I probably have said that plenty of times. You don't need to be aware of that anymore. And everything can be dropped out to Excel or PDF or whatever the case may be. So that's how all of that information is tracked. We can then handle our late fees, our management fees, security deposit refunds. And when we do those expense recoveries, I like to show this briefly because we are able to go in and do an entire property at once. I can come in here and say, here's the property I want to do it for. I actually meant to do the reconciliation, not just the trial run. And I can tell it the date we want to post the adjustment. And then it shows us all the lease clauses and all the recoveries that we need to cover. So if we go in and grab this one, now what it does is it runs that full calculation and I get this detailed reconciliation report. So it shows all of those different expense pools, the way you've had them, applies any occupancy in case they haven't been in for the full year, calculates it based upon their pro rata share, compares it to what they've been billed as an estimate, and comes up with an adjustment charge. And when we hit reconcile, it sends that into the AR system with this as a backup. So all of that detail is there. And all of this then has the ability to be wrapped up in a portal. So your tenants have a spot where they can come in and they can view their accounts. They can run their statements if they'd like to see everything that they owe, and they can process their own payments. They can ask for work orders to be done here, service requests, and so on. And we do give this here for your property managers so they can see a presentation view of the way receivables sit at this point. Just to show you here briefly, I can come in and pull up a list of everybody who owes money. I can click on a given tenant, and now this would be the tenant view as well as the property manager view, where they can generate their statement, make their payment. We, of course, handle everything from credit cards to ACH. I can see if they have any open service requests that have been recorded, see what payment methods they put on file, so on and so forth. So this tenant portal is also available as part of the system. All right, we're getting close on time. So last but certainly not least, I like to make sure that we cover some of our reporting. I know that most people like to see a rent roll. We have standard rent rolls out here. Let's start with our summarized rent roll. And what we can do here is we can go in and run it for all of our entities and then choose which properties we'd like to see it for and as of what date. I'm going to back it up for a little bit of better data. And now it shows me at the top, total square footage, what's occupied, what's vacant, total rent, total other charges, and then of course, detail by space. Occupied, vacant, square footage information, if we have security deposits, rent annually, other charges annually, and per foot. So very easy to get to, and all of these can be sent out to Excel, PDF, PowerPoint for presentations, whatever the case may be. There's also a variety of standard reports. One of my favorites is this time of year is our projected revenue report, where I'm now able to come in and say, for 2025, what does my rent stream look like? So I'm going to come in here and say, let's do this from 1/1/25 to 12/31/25. And I want to see all charges and all current leases. And now it will show me lease by lease. In this case, they expire at the end of October, so it drops off. And what we see most of our clients doing is taking this information out to Excel, making lease up assumptions, and then importing it in. But this is what allows you to then do your budgeting on a lease by lease basis. All right, that's kind of everything I had to cover around the product itself. Let's go back to our PowerPoint. And we've got our last polling question.
All righty. Polling question number 3. Do you think your tenants would like to use a portal for payments? Yes or no? And then Dom, after this, I do have a question or two.
Okay.
All right. Woo, look at that. 100% yes. Who wouldn't want a portal? I mean, come on.
Exactly. So go right ahead. Let's go to your questions.
Okay. So first question, and I actually answered it, but I wanted to give you a chance to correct anything I misspoke about or add your own 2 cents into it. Which version are you using in your presentation? Seems quite different from my version, Sage 50 Premium Accounting. Are most of those functions available for Sage 50 Premium Accounting too? Thanks. And I said, Sage Intacct Real Estate is embedded into Sage Intacct, which is Sage's cloud-based solution. Sage Intacct Real Estate only works with Sage Intacct. Do you want to add anything to that?
You answered that absolutely correctly, Todd. That is exactly correct. And obviously, there is no version because Intacct is always up to date on the most current version.
Absolutely. Okay, another one. How do you amend a lease to add more space?
Great question. So what you're able to do is go into the actual lease itself, and you have two options. Number one, you can go in and add that new space to it, because we do track in the back end all the audit trail of that lease and when it was updated and so on. Or what a lot of people like to do is duplicate the lease, add the new space to it, put any new charges and so on in with it, and end the original lease. That then gives you, from a reporting standpoint, a very clear stop date as to when the old lease ended with that space and the new lease began.
Perfect. Another question just came in. So we can transfer all of our Sage 50 premium accounting data to Sage Intacct later if needed. And I typed in the answer, but I will read it for live. Absolutely. We move people from other accounting systems all the time. Sage 50, QuickBooks, Microsoft Dynamics GP, older Sage products, not an issue whatsoever.
You are correct. I would only add to that list to say also we've converted data from Yardi, MRI, and RealPage as well.
RealPage, yeah, great. Let's see, another question. Let's make this the last one, I guess, because we're getting towards the top here. How do I track how often a tenant is paying rent late?
So inside Sage Intacct, because we track those detailed payment dates, we're flagging if they're being paid late. So we can have a field that increment references or counts every time a tenant is considered late, because we look at those late fee calculations where they have so many grace days, and anytime it's past that, we can add on to that field to track it.
And then I assume you can populate that in a report or a dashboard or something like that.
Yes, yes. Good point, Todd. You're absolutely right.
Perfect. All righty. Well, I'm going to turn this back over. Allie, do you want to close out, or are we're good to roll?
Yeah, I think we're good. Thank you everyone for attending, and thank you, Dom and Todd. And please remember to complete the survey as you close out of the webinar. Have a good day.
Yeah, thanks, Dom. Great job.
Thanks, everybody. Have a great day.